Welcome to our second presentation. This is a joint presentation sponsored by the Environmental Advisory Committee and the Park Board. So tonight we're going to hear how getting your water from there to here. Do you ever wonder how your water gets to your house? We do take water for granted because it's always available whenever we turn on the faucet, but there's a huge infrastructure behind the faucet to ensure the water is safe and delivered reliably. So we have Jeff McKeen, the General Manager of SOCWA. We'll discuss the role of Huntington Woods, SOCWA, and the Great Lakes Water Authority in making sure the water gets from there to here. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I appreciate that. Amy did the summary presentation for me. I always like to start out with the summary as to where I'm going. And the summary is it takes all three of us, Huntington Woods, SOCWA, and the Great Lakes Water Authority to get water to you. And if we're all doing our jobs effectively, you'll never know we're there, which is our whole goal in life. Usually you don't want to have a goal of not to be noticed, but in my business, if you're noticed, that's not a good thing. So our whole goal is to keep you in water all the time and not have any problems. And recently, we've done a good job. I don't want to jinx myself. So things have gone quite well lately. So that's the summary of the presentation. It takes all three of us to get you good quality water. So I want to start with the Great Lakes Water Authority because that's where the water comes from. And then I'll work through SOCWA, and then I'll talk about Huntington Woods. I'll probably spend the most time on SOCWA because that's my organization. And that's, of course, near and dear to my heart. But we need to start with Great Lakes Water Authority. And what I've got behind me is a map. It's a little old, but it still gives you an idea of what the Great Lakes Water Authority system looks like. For those of you that have not heard, Great Lakes Water Authority was established on January 1 of 2016, and they're basically a successor organization of DWSD. They're leasing all the water treatment and pipeline and the sewer treatment and sewer pipeline assets from the city of Detroit and running them as a separate organization. We'll talk a little bit about how that happened and how they're governed in a few minutes, but I want to start with that as the background. And they run a massive water system. And what you've got is this entire area in yellow, and this goes from almost Monroe to the south up to Flint in the north, and from Lake Huron on the east down to Lake Erie in the south. That entire system is run by the Great Lakes Water Authority. They have 5 water treatment plants. The newest is down here at Waterworks Park, which is right on the Detroit River. It was redone about 15 years ago or so. It was the oldest plant in this system, and they redid that completely about 15 years ago. In addition to Waterworks Park, they have a plant in Springwells, or called Springwells. It's on the border between Detroit and Dearborn. A plant on the southwestern part of Detroit, a plant on 8 Mile called Northeast Station. It's 8 Mile and Mound, more or less. And up in Port Huron, that's the plant that's furthest away. So they've got 5 plants to treat water. And the water starts out in the lake, or the river, of course, and there is massive infrastructure that you don't see. As an example, the intake for Belle Isle, there's a very large 12 to 15 foot diameter tunnel that goes all the way from the river up to 8 Mile to supply water to the Northeast plant and over to Springwells and the border between Dearborn and Detroit to supply water to those plants as well. And those have been in there since the 20s and 30s. That may sound like it's really old and needs to be gotten rid of or replaced, but as it turns out, some of the stuff that was built back then is of excellent quality and is, with a little bit of maintenance, can serve us well for a long time. One of the many things that GLWA does to ensure that we've got good, adequate water supply is to have divers go down into those tunnels and inspect the tunnels. And they've just recently inspected those, and you can imagine that, to me, would be a horrible job. You're diving in a height that's 40 to 50 feet down below the surface. Absolutely no light other than what you're providing.
How big around is it?
They're 12 to 15 feet in diameter. So they're huge things. And of course, you do have some remedial work that you take care of, and in the process of addressing that. But it's important to know that they are looking at that stuff, even though it's buried, you don't see it. They are looking at that and to make sure that those structures are sound and they're going to last for a long time, much longer than they've already have. One of the other nice things about having so many sources of supply is you've got a lot of security. If something happens and you lose one plant, either through a mechanical failure, power failure, a pipeline failure, what have you, you have other plants that have the ability to supply you. The GLWA system is designed to handle about twice as much water as we're selling right now. And there are a couple reasons for that. If I look back in the projections when SOCWA was established in the 50s, the population for this area was just projected to grow and grow and grow to be about 3 times what it is now. That, of course, never happened. We have tailed off and our population has been flat to slightly declining for a couple of decades. But these facilities were all designed back in the 50s, 40s, and 30s when the expectation was we'd be able to supply all kinds of additional water. There'd be need for that with all kinds of additional people. That never materialized, so as a result, we've got a tremendous amount of excess capacity. I'll talk about that later as being a problem, but it's also a benefit because it gives us redundancy. If we have a problem, we can go elsewhere. In addition to the water treatment plants, GLWA runs a very extensive water distribution system to get water from the plants to the customers' meters. And in there are a bunch of water storage tanks and a bunch of pumping stations because the water needs to be pumped from go to point A to point B. And again, those are things that all need to be maintained. And they're in the process of looking at all their facilities and determining how much maintenance or what type of maintenance is required and getting that done. So that again, we are able to have these facilities service in the long term. GLWA is now run by a 6-person board. Each county, Wayne, Oakland, Macomb have a rep. There's a rep that's appointed by Governor Snyder to represent Washtenaw, Monroe, and St. Clair counties who have a little bit of their residents in the area. And then there are 2 representatives of the city of Detroit. And the way it is structured, it takes 5 votes basically to do anything of much consequence. So to have a budget approved, have your rates approved, to borrow money, to select a chief executive officer, you need to have 5 votes. And that is proven so far. They've been in existence about 1.5 years now, not quite 1.5 years, 1.25 years. That is going to be something that takes some learning as to how you can live with that. If you've got to get 5 or 6 people to agree on anything substantive, you've got to be doing some compromising, which is why it was set up that way, right? There's no vetoing, but you have to get 5 or 6 votes to get anything done. So it'll take a lot of discussion. Right now, we're in the middle of rate season, and the process of trying to set the rates will come in July, and there will be a ton of discussion around those rates to try and get 5 or 6 people to vote for them. So if I zero in a little bit from where GLWA is to where we are, where SOCWA is, we're right in the middle, which gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility. We can get water from basically 4 of the 5 water treatment plants. The only one we can't get it from is from the Waterworks Park plant. There's just not enough, the hydraulics are not set up enough. You have to do more pumping than is available to get the water up to us. But we can get water from any of those 4 other plants. And because we're right in the middle of the system, we have a lot of flexibility with what we do as well. So if I take down that first chart and put up my chart of the SOCWA system, I won't have enough room to do both. So let me take care of that. SOCWA gets its water from a number of connections with the GLWA. I'll refer back to this, but I don't need it right now. So that in the blue is the SOCWA communities. So that goes from 8 Mile down to south, the bottom of my chart, up to Big Beaver, 16 Mile at the top of Birmingham at the top. And we're going from Inkster Road on the left side at the end of Southfield, all the way over at I-75 on the right side of the end of Royal. So that is the SOCWA system. I give you a little history of that. It was originally established in the early 1950s. And a previous organization that Huntington Woods was involved with, Huntington Woods, Royal Oak, the Zoo, and Rackham, built a pipe down Woodward, down to 8 Mile, to get water from the city of Detroit. Back in those days, this is back in 1927, the city was going to have water, but they decided they were not going to supply water beyond the border of the city. So the communities that got together then ran a pipeline down Woodward and down to this station at Livernois and 8 Mile to get water from Detroit. And they brought that water up into the system, the zoo tower. There's no water in that anymore, but that was an integral part of that system. It's now just an antique and a nice looking sign to mark the way. And those cities went down and got the water from Detroit. In the early 50s, there was a very significant drought in this area, which is something you don't think of in Michigan as having a drought, but there was one back then. And that prompted the rest of the communities to get together with the originating communities, Huntington Woods and Royal Oak, Pleasant Ridge, to build an authority. These communities also got laws passed in Lansing that let communities work together to do this kind of work. And in 1954, SOCWA was formed. And if you think about what Southfield looked like in 1954, it's basically nothing. Right? And the central Woodward corridors were in existence in Huntington Woods in 1954, which probably looks a lot like it did today. But there's been a lot of development surrounding this area. And as a result, there's a lot more people than there were to start with. So the system, SOCWA system, was designed to take water from 8 Mile, and only from 8 Mile. And we've got the ability to take water at 3 places along 8 Mile, 8 Mile in Telegraph, 8 Mile in Greenfield, and 8 Mile in Livernois. And we have some very large pumping stations at all 3 of those locations. His original job was to take water from Detroit and pump that up north into the SOCWA communities. My office is on Webster and Royal Oak, right behind Beaumont, and we've got very large water storage facilities. We've got about 27.5 million gallons of storage on the ground and about 1.5 million up in the air. I'll talk about storage in a few minutes. So the system was designed to take everything from 8 Mile and pump it up to the north. As the GLWA, or the DWC system developed, this Port Huron plant was put in the 60s, and a line was run from Port Huron all the way down to our community. And that enabled us to start taking water from other sources. We've got a feed up here at Horton and Chesterfield, which is just a little bit west of Woodward, 14 Mile in Lasser, and 12 Mile in Livernois. And even though that water has to come a long way to get there, we take our water preferentially from the Lake Huron plant because we don't have to pump it. It's higher pressure. It's basically coming downhill all the way from Port Huron to us. So we don't have to do any pumping of that water. We actually reduce the pressure to get it down into our system. So what we have is we've got 5 places where we can get water into the system, which gives us tremendous flexibility. And what we do from an energy conservation standpoint is in this time of year when there's not a lot of water being used, we don't take any from 8 Mile, even though that was designed to take everything from 8 Mile. We don't take any from 8 Mile. We take it all from the north side, from Port Huron all the way around the Horn until we get down to us. In the summertime, we turn those systems on along 8 Mile because we need the additional capacity. There's a lot more water obviously consumed in the summer than there is in the winter. So we have to pump water up from 8 Mile up into the system to meet the community's needs. So that's how the SOCWA system operates. We've got a number of storage tanks, a number of our own pumping systems, and a control system that's located at our offices right behind Beaumont that controls everything. We also closely monitor everything. We've got a very elaborate called a SCADA system, which is an acronym for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, where we're monitoring the performance of our system, all the meters that we look at, the meters we maintain for each community. We monitor those very closely as well. We have somebody monitoring the system 24 hours a day 365 days a year just to make sure that everything's going well. The fact that we've got so many sources of supply gives us tremendous flexibility. So if one of the water plants goes down, it doesn't matter. You'll never know that. We have the ability to reroute water internally, take it out of storage if we need to, and keep everybody satisfied with water. If you remember back to the blackout of 2003, it's been quite a while now, but we were one of the few areas that was able to keep water supply because we've got our own water in storage. We have about an average day's worth of water in storage at almost all times. So when that happened, we were able to we had no water come into us. We were able to just take our water out of storage that we already put in storage with our own pumps that have our own electric supply. We don't have our own grid, but we do have they're installed generators that can run the pumps. And we're able to supply everybody for about 23 hours. We were close to running out, but we were able to get supply resumed from GLWA before we ran out of water. So our function is sort of the middleman. We buy water, store it, and then sell it back to you. The primary, I printed this out today, and it's not really big enough to see. I'll describe it a little bit and then pass it around. This is a graph of our water sales on June 27th of last year. That was one of our highest days of last year. And the red line is, if I add up all the meters that all the communities have, that is what the red line is. And the blue line is the water we get from Detroit or from GLWA. So what SOCWA performs is that rather than having to meet this peak, and one of the things that is so important in determining the rates for Detroit is that peak volume. What we do is that we beat that peak, the distance between the blue line and the red line. We take the water out of storage and don't buy it from Detroit. So basically we're putting it in at night, which is what you see here. This is midnight over on the far left of the page. And we're taking all kinds of water, more than we're selling, and we're putting it into storage. And the same thing happens at night. You can see we turn our pumps on. Our demand from the system goes up while the demand from the system, from the customers, actually goes down. So as a result, we're able to take that peak and turn it into a much, much smaller number. So that gives us a preferential rate from Detroit. And that's the primary reason why we exist, is to do that function for you. The storage also gives us the ability to have some more security. So if something does happen, we have the ability to live and counteract that for a while. And the fact that we got multiple sources of supply gives us the flexibility as well. So if I go from there for a minute down into Huntington Woods, you'll see the same type of thing. Yep, I need to put this down as well. And that is that Huntington Woods has a number of different redundant sources of supply from the SOCWA system. We feed Huntington Woods at 11 Mile and Newport, at Woodward just a little bit south of 11 Mile, and down here at Scotia and the freeway. And as a result, if Huntington Woods has a problem, or if SOCWA has a problem, there's various ways of getting water into Huntington Woods. The lines on here are the Huntington Woods system. So they have a role in this as well, and their role is to maintain all those lines, maintain the hydrants, maintain the meters, do all the billing. And the system basically runs itself. Huntington Woods doesn't have to do anything to run the system. We basically run things for our communities. We control it from our headquarters on Webster, looking at the pressures and looking at the demands. And if anything needs to change, we change that in our system. Or if we get a call from Huntington Woods that something is wrong, we will manipulate things in our system to try and fix that. Very rare that we have to do that, but we have the ability to do that. So you take a look at the redundancy in the whole system. GLWA has 5 plants, 3 different water intakes. They've got the ability to move water around. SOCWA has 5 places we're taking water from. We have the ability to move the water around the system. Huntington Woods has 3 places that they get water from. There's a ton of redundancy built into the system, which is good for all of us. So that'd be a good place to pause and see if I've caused any questions before we go back and look at some more of the details.
What is the size of the feed lines that would be parallel to the streets?
They're generally small. In Huntington Woods, they're 6 and 8 inch generally. So that's the lines that are out in your street. Okay, and then the larger lines, there's a 12-inch line up in Coolidge, and then down along the service drive, and then down along 11 Mile. So you've got the larger lines along the middle and smaller lines larger lines around the exterior and smaller lines in the middle. Yes.
The water from the storage tanks in Webster,
Yes.
do they treat them differently than stuff maybe say in the city of Detroit? Like a little more chlorine?
No,
Huh?
no, it's all the same stuff. Okay, the 5 treatment plants are treating the same standard, same level of chlorine, same color, odor, those type of things, same level of fluoride. It's all the same. Yes, ma'am.
Do the cities nearby have the same amount of redundancy serving them as we do?
In general, yes. Yeah. That's not always 100% true, but in general, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Other questions? Okay, let's go back and look at some details. So let's start with the big picture again. And let's talk about Flint. That was the one question you had, right? So the Flint system, I'll get my friendly tape here to help me out a little bit. Flint has been a customer of GWSD since the 60s. And at the time, GWSD made the strategic decision they were going to expand their service area. And they didn't just expand it a little bit, they expanded it a lot. Right? So they went all the way up, built the treatment plant in Port Huron, and ran water to Flint. The long-term plan was to bring water down from Flint, down to the northern Oakland suburbs, and then run a line basically down 94 at Gratiot to connect that Port Huron plant to the eastern suburbs as well. Those plans didn't work out for a variety of reasons. So Flint has been supplied by a dead-end line all the way from Imlay City, which is sort of halfway between Port Huron and Flint, into Flint for basically since the 60s. And that was always a problem. That's like the opposite of the redundancy we have. They're dependent on that one piece of pipe. So what the DEQ had to do is they've got their own water treatment plant that is in Flint, supplied from the Flint River. And that was their backup water supply. So they would run that plant a couple days each year in order to assure the DEQ that they were able to have a redundant supply. So if I fast forward several decades and a lot of discussion, Flint, Genesee County, so this is Flint, Genesee County is the rest of the yellow area there, decided they were going to go on their own. And their thinking was that they would have control of their own destiny and have lower rate increases than they would get from Detroit. I'd argue with that. I don't think we'll ever know the true answer, but they made the decision to go on their own. So they have built a line that basically parallel to this line from Detroit. They bought a intake piece of property on the lake right north of the Port Huron plant, right north of Port Huron, and ran their own line up into Genesee County. That pipe is in the ground. It's not active yet. Genesee County is in the process of building their own water treatment plant. That should be supposed to be online this year. I don't think it'll be online this year, but probably shortly thereafter. And Flint, I'm sure you've heard the tale of woe that's come out of Flint, because while they had their own water treatment plant, they had no idea how to run it. And running a water treatment plant based on river water is much, much different than operating from Lake Huron. Lake Huron, that water is just almost immaculate. You could almost drink that right from the lake and not have any issues. I've been to all the plants. One of the things interesting about Lake Huron, they've got various various taps in the plant that are from the various parts of the treatment process. So you get a tap of the raw water, you get a tap of the water it's been initially filtered, and so on until you get down to the end of the treated water. And you can see a little bit of difference from beginning to end, but not a lot. If you did that with the Flint River, you'd see a tremendous difference. And the Flint River river water is variable. That's the key issue with river water. You don't have the nice constant temperature and composition you have with Lake Huron. It changes depending on the temperature, depends on how recently it's rained, how heavily it's rained. So it's a very complicated treatment process. And they weren't treating their water for corrosion inhibition. One of the things that Detroit has done for decades is treated all the water at their plants with a corrosion inhibitor. And that is designed to interact with the copper and lead in the system so those materials don't corrode. Without that corrosion inhibition effect, they had a massive problem in Flint with corrosion of lead service lines. And again, those primarily are the lines from the house, or from the street into the house. Most of the lines, none of the GLWA lines have lead in them. Most of the lines that Flint owns don't have lead in them. The residences, there's a ton of lead in those residences. And that was the root of their problem. They had a variable water supply that was very hard to treat. They didn't do a good job of that, and they were not inhibiting that water with the corrosion, adding a corrosion inhibitor to that water. So that's what caused that problem. As a result, Flint is now back on the GLWA system. They've been back on for about a year, about 2 years now, because they basically gave up. They couldn't control their own system, their own plant well enough. So they came back and got really water that's controlled better, has the proper corrosion inhibition, and their results have slowly declined. And now the state says, yeah, it's fine to drink the water up there. But there's been a lot of damage that's been done. Yes, ma'am?
When did they open their own treatment plant?
They've been running it since the 60s.
60s?
Yes,
Yeah.
but not running
the way you
it.
should have.
Well, not running it continuously. They run it for 2 days a year, or a week a year.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's one thing to do something.
They test it.
Exactly. Yeah, and they never consumed the water out of it. They took the water and dumped it. So, it's one thing to claim you can run something and another thing completely to be able to run it. So that caused a lot of problems. And I think that's caused us issues as well. If you look at our water consumption in the winter months is continuing to decline about 1.5% a year. And that's not weather, right? It's just native consumption.
But that's conservation, right?
Part of that's conservation, yep.
Because everybody's trying to encourage that.
I'm not trying to encourage that, okay?
Not you.
Not me, no. So I'm kind of glad Amy is gone, because that's not the official party line, that's just my personal line. We've got more water than we can ever use, and the water quality is great. We'll look back to that. We talked a little about that before, but we'll look back to that when I'm done. We could sell twice as much water today as we are right now.
But people are using water bottles.
Well, there's a whole variety of things. That's
Yeah.
one. One is, if you look back at the flood in Huntington Woods, how many water heaters were replaced in Huntington Woods, how many washers were replaced in Huntington Woods. And you buy a new washer or a new dishwasher, and they don't use nearly the kind of water they used to use. I know we bought a new dishwasher at home a year ago, and yeah, it doesn't hardly use any water, which is horrible if you're a water person. The thing needed to be replaced. So, and I think the Flint situation has hurt us as well, because if you read in the paper every day the water is not safe to drink, there's a lot of people, we got a lot of calls to the office that want to know if the Flint water was in their system. Well, no, it's not in your system. You don't need to worry about that. But the perception in some people's minds is out there. As well as just a general conservation ethic throughout the country. And almost anything you buy, you're going to be using less water than when you did before. So that has been a problem for us. It's also caused us some rate issues. Flint is between Flint and Genesee, that's about 8 to 9% of the total volume. So assuming nothing else changes, that means our rates are going to go up by that amount. Part of that has already been baked in. That was into effect last year. And part of it's going to go into effect this year, and like I said, we're debating back and forth over how much that's going to be and when that's going to be.
Now, you're negotiating that with the Great Lakes Water Authority. You're trying to get a good rate for us.
Exactly, yes. And there are several factors in there. One is the demand I pointed out earlier. We keep our demand down, which is, I don't want you to keep your demand down, I want me to keep my demand down. Those are two different things, right? Because we're storing water, right? So I want you to be able to, if you look at what happens in our system, everybody gets up and takes a shower and makes breakfast. That's what this huge peak in the morning is. Then you get home from work and you come in and make dinner. That's what our afternoon peak is. We want you to keep doing that, right? And we're controlling the blue line so we can maintain below a certain level. Okay, but I want you to keep using as much as you possibly can.
Is that a benefit to the system, or is that just because you guys need more money?
It's both,
Okay.
okay? Because we're owned by the communities, right? So there is really no difference between us and Huntington Woods. Huntington Woods is, Amy's one of my 23 bosses between the two organizations, SOCWA and SOCWA. So, basically if we do well, that means we can give better rates to you. So they're not two different things, okay? And our actions are all guided by our board, right? So just like the GLWA board has to have 5 of 6 votes, we vote on everything as well. I try and have everything unanimous. That's not quite always possible, but it's always my goal because we all have the same interests. We're all in the same area. We all have the same interests. We should all be looking at things the same way. So that's my goal is to never have to count votes, although I always try and know what people are thinking before I ask them the question. So, in terms of issues we're facing, that overcapacity is one issue, right? It's a blessing because we have a lot of redundancy, but it's an issue because that means we've got extra facilities to take care of. So at the moment, we're debating whether we should close a water treatment plant. And Northeast plant is probably the one that will end up being closed eventually. Again, the issue is GLWA can treat twice as much water as they need to, and that's not as efficient. That's not efficient. You want to be able to try and match your supply with your demand. That's the plant that's in most dire need of upgrading. So if it were to stay online, it would have to be many millions of dollars have to be put into that to get it the current state of technology. So that will probably go offline sometime in the next 4 or 5 years, but that does mean you need to change some things out, change this way the system's operating to get that to take place. The fact that we have to do this maintenance with lower water sales is an issue as well. There's a big debate now over what are sales going to be. We've had this last summer, we had the first summer in really 3 summers that had a decent sprinkling demand. It wasn't great, but it was decent. And for our communities, that's really important, that we sell a lot of water in the summertime. And to the extent we can sell a lot of water in the summertime, that helps us lower our rates than for everybody else. But having to maintain things with lower sales is one of our challenges. Second challenge is we have a lot of old infrastructure in the ground. If I look back to the SOCWA map for a moment, we were built largely in the 50s and 60s. In fact, it's interesting, the first piece of pipe that SOCWA bought was down here at Northland. I'm going to get my tape on there before this falls and breaks. In 1954, we bought a piece of pipe in Greenfield from 8 Mile up to Northland. Northland at the time, and there was nothing around there, so they were building their own infrastructure. And we bought that pipe from them. So a lot of our pipes are from the 50s and 60s. And we're in the process of replacing some of them. We had a line on 11 Mile in Huntington Woods, also went through Oak Park. And the technology at the time was it's basically a cast iron pipe that is 16 feet long, bolted together. And the pipe is amazing. It doesn't look like it's a day in the ground, but it's been there 50, 60 years. The problem is the bolts that hold the pipe together are not there anymore. right? So we had a number of issues over a lot of years where we had to dig little holes and basically knock all the old bolts out, put new bolts in. But if you have to do that every 16 feet, that doesn't work. So we took advantage of when 11 miles was repaved of replacing that pipe. Put a new pipe in there that's going to hopefully last for at least 100 years, if not longer. And so we try and do that, take advantage of other infrastructure projects that are going on.
New pipe inside the old?
No, this was direct buried because in this case, the road was being completely rebuilt. If you remember 11 Mile, they dug out everything and started over, right? So that's ideal for us because you don't have to do any restoration, any paving. Okay, so we were able to go ahead and do that the easy and basically the cheapest way because of all the other work that's going on. We are looking at what you talked about, putting a new pipe inside the old pipe. We've got mains in Coolidge from, where am I? Coolidge. Coolidge is right here, from 13 Mile up to 14 Mile. And that is going to be, that and 14 Mile is being repaved in the next 3 or 4 years. We've got pipes in both those places, and again is the 16-inch pipe that's bolted together every 16 feet. And we're looking at taking a polyethylene liner and inserting it inside that pipe, and that's probably something we'll do within the next year. We will have not done that before, so that's basically a brand new technology. It's been available in much smaller diameters. If you have pipe replaced in your neighborhood with 6 or 8 inch stuff, it's usually a smaller diameter pipe like that. It's only recently available in the bigger diameter, so we'll be probably doing that within the next 12 months. Probably starting at Coolidge and then looking at Maple or at 14 Mile. So there's a lot of infrastructure to keep going as well. The other issue that our friends at Red Lakes Water Authority are facing is what do they do about their future? Because they're looking at the fact they've got twice as much pipe, or twice as much capacity as they have, as they need, rather. And they're looking at what they can do about that. So they're looking at places like Lyon Township, that's out here off the map. And if you drive up 96 and go towards Lansing, you see that all developed. It used to be all farmland when I was a kid, but now it's all fully developed. And they're looking for water as well. So we're trying to balance out what are the costs of supplying them and how can they do that in a way that is both fair to us as existing customers and fair to these potential new customers. And we also want to do that, if we're going to do that, in a way that's not providing incentives for people to leave our communities and move out to Lyon Township. So that is one thing that's being hotly debated among the water community is how do you make those decisions? How do you factor in those things? And the final thing we're working on is this new authority and the fact that you need 5 votes, 5 to 6 votes to do anything. So how can you work together to learn from each other? How can you work together to develop solutions that work effectively for all the parties involved? And that'll be a new experience because there's a huge variety of perspectives there. You know, if you look within Oakland County has 1 vote on that board, but the interests in the southern part of Oakland County are different than the interests in the northern part of Oakland County. So how do you balance that to the 1 voting representative, and then how do they balance that across organizations to try and figure out how to handle something like that? So we're in a very good place. We have a tremendous supply of water. It's great quality before it gets treated. Afterwards, it's probably among the best quality water in the world. I know whenever I go on a vacation, I always come back and have a big glass of water. The first thing I do when I get home, because to me this water tastes just absolutely great. It's my favorite beverage. And I'm not saying just as a water person, that was the case before I had this job. And I really appreciate that when I'm someplace else, because you really notice the difference. We were in Florida for a week, about a month ago. My wife refuses to drink the water there because she said it tastes bad. But so we have an abundant supply. We have a very clean, very safe supply of water. It's monitored very closely. We do all kinds of testing. Detroit does all kinds of testing. It's very thoroughly tested. There are no issues with the water supply we've got. But we have issues in trying to maintain what we've got and maintain it in a way that is cost effective for our residents. And believe it or not, buying more water does help us with that. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
So you don't want to hear about our rain barrel event?
Rain barrels are fine because you're trying to solve another problem,
Right.
right?
Right,
Right.
right. But it doesn't help you.
No, but the amount of water sales I'm going to lose from rain barrels
Is minimal.
is minimal, and I'd rather not have the flood. I mean, on my other hand, I run soccer as well, and that was a horrible time for us, as well as was for the members of the community on the Woods. So if we can do something to prevent that, we're all for that. Okay? Other questions? David?
I keep hearing that Huntington Woods could buy water at different times of the day or different months of the year for a different price. Is that a possibility?
Well, we buy water at different times of day for you. Okay, that was the two lines on the graph that I showed you. Right, that the blue is what we're buying, and we're buying at night and not buying during the day, and we're selling during the day. So we do that for you, so you don't have to worry about that. The time of year that makes no difference, and it's also we have water. We have a lot of water in storage, but you can't just leave it sitting there forever, right? You do lose chlorine eventually, so you've got to move the water, and we have to be very careful about how long the water has been in storage. As a matter of fact, we even have one tank offline right now because it just during the wintertime we're just not going to need it, so we have one tank offline. We have to get that back online in a month or so. So the time of year you can't do that. It's got to be fairly close to the day you're going to use it. And the fact that we buy water at that basically a level rate, level volume, and then let you take it on a variable volume accomplishes the same thing.
So do you think our rates are like some of the lowest in the South because of that? Because of that strategy?
They're lower than comparable communities.
Really?
Yeah. You know, there are many things that go into the water rates. One is the distance from the water treatment plants, the elevation, which you can't control that. You know, the ground level is what it is the ground level, and our location is location. How much water you buy has a big effect on that. So if you're a community that doesn't sprinkle very much, Detroit's the best example of that. You know, they don't have a lot of sprinkling on. They have a fairly high industrial load, so their load profile is really flat. They don't have those big peaks that I showed. So they've got a better profile from a water rate standpoint than we do. But if you look at a community, like if you compare Huntington Woods to West Bloomfield or Huntington Woods to Bloomfield Hills or Bloomfield Township, our rates are substantially lower because of the fact that we've got the storage and we take that peak component right out of the rates completely.
That's great.
Yes, sir.
Is this fiasco on 15 Mile, is that part of the Great Lakes Water Authority?
Not directly, no. And I'm a water guy, I'm not a sewer guy, right? So I'll right. But I know only enough about sewage to be a little bit dangerous. That line was bought from Detroit about 5 or 6 years ago by Macomb County. And there'll be a lot of finger pointing before this thing gets resolved as to whose fault it was that this thing was not well maintained. But it is Macomb County's line, and right now it's Macomb County's problem.
And you're talking the sewer line.
The sewer line, yeah, yeah.
But they were talking about it, one reason for the problem was it was not inspected. How do you inspect something that's 50 feet down?
They put people in there.
Like you guys inspect the water.
Yeah, this is a little bit worse because it's not water you're in,
Right.
right? But they actually have the ability to shut off the sections of this thing for a while. Do that overnight when the flows are down low, and you get in there and actually physically inspect the thing. And it's obviously very important you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sewer service is much harder on pipes than water is. Water is relatively mild compared to sewer. So it's even more important on sewer lines that you inspect them and maintain them regularly and maintain them well.
Is that a concrete pipe?
That particular one's concrete, yeah. But it's not pipe you buy in a store, it's pipe that's actually made, exactly. It's made in the field, yeah. But that obviously depends on, it's got to be it's got to be supported correctly. And again, I'm not an expert on sewer, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Yes, ma'am?
To pressurize the system, that's all done by pumps? So-
Yes.
Okay, so some systems are from these elevated water heaters, right? These kinds of pressurized systems?
Yeah, but that's how you get the water in there is through pumps.
I see, so it's ultimately.
Yeah,
okay.
ultimately pumps, yeah.
Because I find pressure kind of variable, although usually it relates to hot weather when everybody's sprinkling at once when the pressure drops, but
Right.
not always. I never was like, well,
What should be fairly constant except during hot weather. And during hot weather, what you'll see is you have much higher pressure at night than you do during the day,
okay.
okay?
That's interesting. I mean, because.
I shouldn't say much
At my
higher
house,
pressure.
I've never particularly noticed it, but I do some watering at City Hall.
Mhm.
Just like put out a sprinkler like you would for grass or whatever.
Right.
And sometimes there's not enough pressure to even make an oscillating sprinkler, you know, the water comes up 12 inches, there's just
Mhm.
nothing.
Right,
And I always found it hard to predict, but at night, now you mentioned, I've never seen that later in the day.
right. And it gets back to my chart here, right? So if I'm up in these
Yeah.
peak areas, that's when my flow's the highest, my pressure's the lowest, right? So early in the morning, and this starts tailing off really fast about 8 o'clock. And then in the evening, it starts about 4 or 5 o'clock and then tails off again at 8. So if you're trying to do it, you know, watering in those morning especially, it's going to be the
Yeah.
lowest.
Yeah.
Afternoon, a little bit lower as well. Okay. And, you know, one of the things that we try and do is be gentle about that pressure effect, because that does cause problems
Oh,
for our
yeah.
friends in Huntington Woods and the other
Well,
communities we
find out
serve.
for the pipes or anything.
Exactly.
change it too quickly.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. But we also have these large pumps that are, you know, from the 50s, which sounds like it's really bad, but it's not, because they are so solid, they're not going anywhere. But they also, you know, it's on and it's off.
Mhm.
It's a little
Yeah,
older
yeah.
technology,
It's
so.
rough for them, yeah.
Yeah. So we have to be very careful with how we manage things. So ideally, you'll never see any pressure, but yeah, you will.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
The station that might get shut down, that's the, say, 8 Mile and Hoover maybe?
Yes, 8 Mile
It's
Hoover.
like a long little building.
Exactly, on the south side of the road. Yep.
You know anything about who built that? Because it's an interesting looking building. Would they just mothball it or tear it down?
Well, they'll have to use the pumps that are in there. So that building, there's one building for pumps, and usually the pumps is what you see. The treatment is in the back a little bit. So that the pumps will stay there. The treatment will probably be shut down and left there. If you've ever gone down to Waterworks Park, they've got some amazing architecture there. You know, when that was built, it was a different era. And the same thing for that plant that's in Dearborn, the border between Dearborn
So
and
if
Detroit.
they reduce the capacity of the system, will that stabilize rates? In other words, by taking those costs out of the system, are you going to drop rates? Or is it the rates going to go up anyhow because of the cost of maintenance?
The rates probably go up anywhere the cost of maintenance. And basically, this will keep them from going up as fast as they may have otherwise.
So really, so you're taking the capacity, just like plants shutting down plants.
Yep.
In automotive, you shut it because you got overcapacity, it costs you to maintain.
Right.
How many could you shut down and still maintain the same level of service?
You can probably shut down 2.5 of them right now. Yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
one that's on the negotiating table, I'm sure.
Well, we're still talking about it, but it's also, you can't just turn them off, right? That's the problem, is you've got this entire network that's been developed over these years based on those 5 plants. So if you take one out, you've got to make a bunch of changes.
Sure. Then you lose the redundancy then too.
Assuming you're doing redundancy, yeah. And then you've also got that tunnel I talked about that's buried under the city of Detroit that, you know, that's really a tremendous asset.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah. Is the system vulnerable to any terrorist attacks?
Probably not.
Poisoning,
No, probably not. Particularly the treatment facilities are guarded very securely. It's very hard to get even when you're supposed to be there. That's one of our pet peeves, that if you got a meeting at Waterworks Park, you always have to allow an extra half hour to clear security.
Oh, wow.
So they're very security conscious. The other issue is the volumes of the water we use are just huge. And if you look at the math involved, to try and do something, you'd have to have a tremendous quantity of material to do something with.
Oh, I see.
Because it gets diluted really, really quickly. But, you know, that is something. It's a consideration, yeah, absolutely. And, you know, one of the reasons why we've got people that monitor the system 24 hours a day, just to make sure that we don't see anything weird going on.
You monitor the chemistry in the water as well, or just the pressure?
We're monitoring continually the pressure and the flows. The chemistry is looked at by DWSD, the supplier, on a continuous basis, and then we do samples on a weekly basis for bacterial issues.
So cryptosporidium, I remember that hitting
Yes.
back in Milwaukee. years
Milwaukee,
ago.
yeah.
And that's when everybody started buying these filters for their, that's
Right.
why I bought my filter.
Yeah.
But that could be I mean, I don't know how you manage that, but.
Well, it's not a huge issue because of where our source water comes from. The crypto is more of a well-based system. The system that had the crypto issue was more of a well-based system, where you're more prone to contamination because of the point you're getting the water from. You know, if you look particularly out at the Fort Huron plant, the intake is out there a mile and a half into the lake. I mean, it's in way down into the lake. So it's a very hard, you get tremendously pure, good water from there. But again, it's something we keep our eye on.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
I was a child when we first moved to Huntington Woods, and I lived through the installation of the 12 tower. That is a result of the expansion of all of the water systems in the area. It was at that time that they decided to do combination. Do you overlap those areas, the SOCWA, in those same areas as the
In most, but not all.
And you never use those pipes, those
No.
cells?
They're completely different, totally independent.
What about this big tunnel that they built on Middle Belt? I think it's Middle Belt and Maple. That's their pore capacity. Could you explain what that is, if you know?
I think it's a stormwater retention facility. But that's something the county is building, so we're not involved in that, and so I don't know the details of that. Yes, ma'am.
Just because I'm curious, the intake up in Lake Huron, this is that big one that had an explosion at one
Exactly.
point, so it's been put back in, or whatever.
Yeah, the explosion was when it was being built.
Yeah, I remember that. I just
Yeah.
tried
Yeah, I remember that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a horrible event.
It was, yes,
Yeah.
my father was on the Detroit Water Board.
Okay.
I know it was a big crisis.
Yes, it was horrible. Yeah.
Yeah,
When
oh,
was
yeah.
it?
It was in the early
62
60s.
or 3,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Had a number of people killed.
yeah, it was off,
Yeah.
and stopped all the development, and they'd already built a lot of it, and
Yes.
it was all shut down for quite a long time,
Yeah.
and the city was still paying off bonds, but they had no use of it, I don't know.
Right. It was a
really
big mess.
complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a big, yeah.
Right. Anything else?
So we're good.
You're good. Yes, you're good,
We
and
know it
hopefully
all.
you'll stay good.
Yeah,
And
sounds
it's-
like we will.
Yeah, and it's not just me, it's a bunch of people like me that are keeping our eyes on you.
Good.
So we should have you covered.
So by the way, our water rates pay your salary?
Yes,
Okay. just curious.
but not much.
I understand. I understand.
Paying per household.
Probably not even that, so. It's my cost is split half between SOCWA and half between SOCWA, so.
Very good.
Very good.
Could you
Very
just
good.
mention SOCWA and the taking of the.
Oh, yeah, David wanted me to mention that SOCWA does take at our facility in Troy medications, prescription and non-prescription medications. Just we won't take controlled substances. That's the one thing we won't take there. So you don't need an appointment anymore. That was one of the things that Claire hounded us into.
This is the one on Coolidge?
The one on Coolidge,
But you
right
won't
across
take
from
controlled
Rangers.
substances?
Won't take controlled substances.
Where do those, especially liquids, because I have some left from an old surgery.
That's you,
Nobody wants
yes,
liquids.
David about that.
That you can take to the police department?
They won't
or-
take it, it has to be solid, they will take no liquids.
Really?
Yeah, already been through that.
Check Lincoln Drugs.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Lincoln Drugs, ask them, they are another area of disposal of prescription drugs.
Okay.
But most people just dump it down the drain, right?
Yeah, but that's the problem.
No.
Yeah,
You
you're
don't
not-
want-
you're not
that's
supposed to
what
do
you don't
that.
want to Yeah, you don't want that.
But that's what they're doing. So-
Right, well,
Right.
You
that's why
guys are
you're
probably
supposed to
countering
do
it somehow, or you're trying to.
Well, we're trying to counter that
Yeah.
by providing service to
Consider
our
it.
residents.
And the state police for a while, but then they didn't want it either.
Right, right. The problem is that
The
it's,
whole liquid thing is the problem.
yeah, it's very expensive. We pay a lot of money for that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And all the police departments take that, and this is something new
Yeah.
that the Senior Advisory Council in the
Yeah,
Oakland
this
County
Huntington Woods does, yeah.
is trying to get an awareness of where to take the prescription and non-prescription drugs so that
Yeah.
we can keep them out of the water system.
Yeah.
Well, they
Okay.
just go into the landfill.
No.
I'm sorry.
But they just go into the landfill at Soxhlet.
No, they incinerate.
What's wrong with that?
If it's done correctly, you're okay.
Oh,
It's got to get there. That's the issue. That's the issue.
You have a new building, or your building is being expanded.
We are expanding our facility, and we're basically doubling our recycling capacity.
Oh, excellent.
We're hopefully breaking ground on April 10th. So,
How long, are you still at the Coolidge facility?
yes, still at the Coolidge facility, yeah. So we'll be not processing recycling there for about 6 months or so, but it will be processed, it's just going someplace else for a while.
I don't know how you guys handled all those trucks coming in there during the 2014 flood.
Oh.
I mean, it looked like an army. Trucks coming and going.
Yes.
That
day
was
and night.
amazing,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Oh, it was
Yeah.
wonderful.
Kudos, I mean, you got through it, but boy, I'm sure it was, I bet your hair wasn't great.
It was. I can't blame it on that,
Oh.
so. Yeah, no, that was quite an experience. And one I look back on, fondly be the wrong word, but it was really exciting. We had no idea what we were going to do, how we were going to handle it, but
Lessons learned, did people learn stuff from that? I mean, how to do things better in the future, or
I think we've learned a lot, yes.
I mean, there was a gap there, I'm sure.
Yes, there were lots of gaps, yes. The problem is, with each passing year, you forget some of the lessons.
Mhm.
Yeah. And one of the things that we tried to work on in the heat of the moment was, I'll pick on Beverly Hills, because they're my favorite target at the moment. I tried to convince them, well, don't let us not pick up your trash for a week. Okay, because that would help, right? And their response was, no, you gotta pick up the trash. I'll give you 2 days, but I can't give you a week. Yeah. So we've talked through that, and I think I have everybody on board to let go a week, maybe 2,
In an emergency.
in an emergency. But the proof will be in the pudding, well, yeah.
Hopefully we don't want to do that.
Well, from a philosophy standpoint, I think we need to be prepared for that
Indeed.
at all the time, so.
Just
yeah.
the stage,
Yeah,
just the
yeah.
stage.
Exactly, and hope we don't have it, but we are ready, so.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
I want to tell you about a few activities coming up in the next few weeks. There is a sheet in the back of all of our other speakers. March 13th, we're having a speaker from the Clinton River Watershed Council to talk on stormwater. March 27th, we're doing native landscaping for water quality, and speaker will be, again, from Clinton River Watershed. This is another way to detain the water on your property, and that's what we're trying to do with all these programs, get water awareness and what to do with the water so we can have less going into the storm water. April 24th, do-it-yourself water-friendly lawn care, and how to cut your lawn to a certain height so that it will infiltrate the water. If it's too short, it's just like concrete. It's going to just run off. May 8th, we have community and family gardening, talking about our garden program that we have on 11 Mile and other programs. Then on May 27th, we have Rich Pullman, National Weather Service. And he's very interesting. He predicted last winter that we would have a very mild winter before the winter came. So maybe this year he'll predict what we had this winter and maybe next winter. So tell everyone you know, these are great programs.